In 1637, France places a few missionaries in the Ivory Coast. That's it. They just put a few missionaries in the Ivory Coast in 1637, so the beginning of their imperial empire began. Eventually, they would rule the Ivory Coast 200 years later. Today, France still controls the Ivory Coast's currency, the reserves. They got first dibs on the gold, silver, oil, and the other raw materials found in the borders of the Ivory Coast. Forced the Africans who live in the Ivory Coast to speak and write French, can militarily intervene anytime they want to do so, and they could send weapons to whoever they support within that country, and if France is at war, they can call on the Ivory Coast to be their ally. So I'm not for sure if the Ivory Coast can even ever say that they actually had an Independence Day. So remember, in Vietnam, it was the French troops who started the occupation, and then America tried to cover up the French, their asses, and then we got sucked into the Vietnam trap. In 1637, Elizabeth Poole becomes the first woman to have founded a town, Taunton, Massachusetts, in the Americas. So 1637, good year for women's rights, for feminism. Elizabeth Poole, she founded the town of Taunton in Massachusetts. Elizabeth Poole sailed from Plymouth, England, in 1633 on the Speedwell with 2 friends, 14 servants, goods, and 20 tons of fish for fishing provision. She intended to form a settlement for the conversion of the Native Americans to Christianity. Although the Taunton town seal depicts Elizabeth Poole, the first name Elizabeth Poole, the town seal today of Taunton depicts her as purchasing the land from the local Wampanoag, Thanksgiving Indians, Wampanoags, Pequot, Wampanoags, Marangasses, Neantics. These are all Thanksgiving Indians, Native American Indians that have to do with the Thanksgiving story. She actually wasn't involved in the original transaction, so she didn't actually buy the land, but together with her brother, William Poole, she acquired a large section of the land that was purchased, and this led to the development of the Taunton settlement in 1638. The next year, March 3rd, 1639, the settlement was officially incorporated. So Elizabeth Poole was able to get some land through William Poole, but once she got her land, she established Taunton settlement along with her 14 servants. So she had lots of salt, 14 servants. Don't know if they were white or black. There was indentured servants, but perhaps it was Africans. So that's Elizabeth Poole's story. Now there's a war on Christmas in 1637 in Japan. December 17th, 1637, the Shimabara rebellion erupts in Japan when 30,000 peasants in the heavily Catholic area of northern Kyushu revolt. The Shimabara rebellion, Japanese peasants led by Makusa Shiro rose against Daimyo Matsukura Shigeharu. On this day in history, the Shimabara rebellion was an uprising in southwestern Japan, lasted from December 17th, 1637 to April 15th, 1638, during the Edo period. It largely involved peasants, most of them Catholic Christians. It was one of only a handful of instances of serious unrest during the relatively peaceful period of the Tokugawa shogunate's rule. In the wake of the Matsukura clan's construction of a new castle at Shimabara, taxes were drastically raised, which provoked anger from local peasants and ronin, which are samurai without masters. Religious persecution of the local Catholics exacerbated the discontent, which turned into open revolt in 1637. The Tokugawa shogunate sent a force of over 125,000 troops to suppress the rebels, and after a lengthy siege against the rebels at Hara Castle, defeated them. In the wake of the rebellion, the Catholic rebel leader Makusa Shiro was beheaded, and the prohibition of Christianity was strictly enforced. Japan's national seclusion policy was tightened, and official persecution of Christianity continued until the 1850s. Following the successful suppression of the rebellion, the Amyo of Shimabara Matsukura Katsui was beheaded for misruling, becoming the one and only daimyo to be beheaded during the Edo period. So in Japan, for over 200 years, it wasn't just a war on Christmas or a war on Christians, but a war on Christianity itself. Now, a war on Christmas has actually happened in America before by the Puritans, by the Pilgrims. These Thanksgiving, assholes. Thanksgiving is a religious holiday, but Thanksgiving totally trumps Christmas. Christmas is pagan, and the Puritans knew it. So the Puritans, they were pissed off by what they viewed as excesses on Christmas Day. For Puritans, you couldn't express no joy. It was all about duty, being obedient to a strict hierarchy. And so the excesses on Christmas Day, there's drink and party. So eventually the Puritans, William Bradford, John Winthrop, they made it illegal to have a Christmas tree, to take off work for Christmas Day or to celebrate Christmas in any way, shape, or form, or else be fined 5 shillings. So this are the main Pilgrims. William Bradford is the first governor of the Plymouth Plantation, or the one elected governor when that first guy died, or something, I don't know. But he was the main guy here once they got here. John Winthrop, these are major characters. So, on November 7th, 1637, Anne Hutchison was tried in the Massachusetts Bay Colony as a heretic. So while the Puritan Pilgrims had some advance in women's rights when it comes to Elizabeth Poole, Elizabeth Poole was able to found her own city, Taunton, Taunton. Taunton, Massachusetts is there because of Elizabeth Poole. So it's good for women's rights, but it's bad for women's rights because every once in a while the Puritan Pilgrims were burning witches. They would burn women for being witches. And so, it was a fascinating, actually, sort of trial that happened, but this goes back to John Winthrop. Okay? So Anne Hutchison, she's born Anne Marbury. It was a Puritan spiritual advisor, mother of 15, an important participant in the antinomian controversy that shook the infant Massachusetts Bay Colony from 1636 to 1638. So you massacred the Pequot. That's what John Winthrop did in 1637 in May, and then in November had a trial for Anne Hutchison for saying something, being a heretic. It's not very clear how she is a heretic, though. So Anne Hutchison's strong religious convictions were at odds with the established Puritan clergy in the Boston area, and her popularity and charisma helped create a theological schism that threatened to destroy the Puritans' religious experiment in New England. She was eventually tried and convicted and banished from the colony with many of her supporters. On November 7th, 1637, Anne Hutchison was brought to trial, and this trial was presided over by Governor John Winthrop on the charge of traducing, slandering the ministers. You said something bad about my friends. Other charges against her were laid out by John Winthrop, the declarator of Thanksgiving, including being one who troubled the peace of the Commonwealth and churches, promoting and divulging opinions that had caused recent troubles, and continuing to hold meetings at her home despite a recent synod banishment that had condemned them. They found it difficult to charge her because, unlike Wheelwright and the other men who had been tried, she had never spoken her opinions in public, nor had she ever signed any statements about them. So freedom from religion, freedom of speech, not too many freedoms in this Massachusetts Bay Colony. So John Winthrop's first 2 lines of prosecutorial attack were to portray her as a co-conspirator of others who had openly caused trouble in the colony, and then to fault her for holding conventicles. Question by question, Anne Hutchison effectively stonewalled him in her responses. The floundering John Winthrop was unable to find a way to convert Anne Hutchison's known membership in a seditious faction into a convictable offense. The Deputy Governor, Thomas Dudley, with a substantial background in law, stepped in to assist the prosecution. Dudley essentially harassed badgered Anne Hutchison about her conventicles and her association with the other conspirators. With no answer by Anne Hutchison, he moved on to the charge of her slandering the ministers. Now, Anne Hutchison eventually gets all dramatic. You have no power over my body, neither can you do me any harm, for I am in the hands of the eternal Jehovah, my Savior. I am at his appointment. The bounds of my habitation are cast in heaven. No further do I esteem of any mortal man than creatures. In his hand I fear none but the great Jehovah, which hath foretold me of these things, and I do verily believe that he will deliver me out of our hands. Therefore take heed how you proceed against me, for I know that for this you go about to do to me, God will ruin you and your posterity and this whole state. John Winthrop's an asshole, and this is a really bad example against him. 3 of the ministers were sworn in and each testified against Anne Hutchison. John Winthrop moved to have her banished. In the ensuing tally, only the Boston deputies voted against the conviction, and Hutchison challenged the sentence's legitimacy, saying, I desire to know wherefore I am banished. John Winthrop responded, the court knows wherefore and is satisfied. So you're banished in the month, and get away from us. Anne Hutchison was called a heretic and an instrument of the devil, and was condemned to banishment by the court as being a woman not fit for our society. The Puritans sincerely believed in banishing Anne Hutchison. They are protecting God's eternal truth. John Winthrop summed up the case with the genuine feeling. Thus it pleased the Lord to hear the prayers of his afflicted people, and by the care and endeavor of the wise and faithful minister of the churches, assisted by the civil authority, to discover this masterpiece of the old serpent. And he ended by noting, it is the Lord's work, and it is marvelous in our eyes. I am at the eternal Jehovah. Fuck.